you feel disconnected? Do you spend time with friends and family all the time and yet it doesn't feel fulfilling? It just feels like something is missing? Today I'm going to show you a case study on how I help people go from feeling that way to feeling fulfilled in their lives. Now, for privacy reasons, this case study is chimerical, which basically means that it is taking general themes that I see in the work that I do with people and sort of putting them together into how my sessions typically go with clients. My name is Sean. I'm a mental health coach. I see 40 plus clients a week. I have a 98% satisfaction score from over 1,400 ratings. And today we're going to talk about this chimerical client that we're going to talk about where they started, where they ended up, and how they got there. So to give you sort of a broad overview, they started feeling very disconnected. They lived at home with their parents. They felt lots of hatred for themselves. They were a people pleaser and they felt purposeless. Where they ended up was in a happy relationship, living with their partner, loving themselves, very good. They became very good at setting boundaries and having hard conversations. And they had a strong sense of connection with their spirituality and sort of the world around them. And there are three main steps that we took to make this happen. The first one is emotional empowerment. Second is narrative navigation. And the third one is Dharma design. I'll talk about what each of those are as we go through the case study. So when I first started working with this client, it was pretty clear that they were unhappy in their living situation, but that's not what they originally came to me for. What they originally came to me for was what I talked about at the beginning of the video. They hung out with friends all the time, and yet they just didn't feel fulfilled by it. It felt sort of empty for whatever reason. And so we started with emotional empowerment, or in other words, allowing their emotions to be heard and understood. Because so many of us, we have all of these emotional signals, but in a lot of ways, we end up ignoring them or invalidating them without even realizing it. And what we discovered as we started to allow their emotions room to breathe and express themselves is that the reason that they felt very disconnected from their friends was because they didn't feel comfortable being themselves. They felt like they needed to be whatever their friends wanted them to be. And so in that way, they weren't actually connecting with their friends. They were wearing a mask, and the mask was connecting with their friends. And so it was an unfulfilling experience for them. So then we started diving into narrative navigation. We needed to understand how this narrative got written of it's not okay to be myself, or it is unsafe to be myself. Turns out they had been through some pretty traumatic experiences in their childhood where it was literally essential to their survival to not be themselves and to be what people needed them to be. And so then it made perfect sense that they carried that forward into adulthood because that's how they learned to survive. Now we needed to rewrite that narrative. Sadly, because this happened at such a young age, they had come to the conclusion that everything was their responsibility and by extension their fault. Now, this is super normal and common. It happens all the time because when we are that young, we actually don't have the capacity to know that other people exist. So we know that mom is there, but mom, like we just cry and mom gives us milk. We don't have an understanding that mom is like a separate person with her own thoughts and feelings and all that sort of thing. And so we just, mom is almost like a tool that we use to get our needs met. And this is actually essential for growing because, for instance, when you're learning how to walk, it would be a nightmare if every time when you fell down, you blamed Uncle Jim. You would never learn how to walk. It's important that we take responsibility as a kid for the things that we are trying to learn so that we can grow and learn how to walk and talk and all that good stuff. The problem is that when traumatic events occur, the only conclusion, because your brain literally hasn't developed enough, the only conclusion is that it is my fault. As an adult, they were able to logically recognize that it obviously wasn't their fault, but it still felt that way because of that kid being sort of frozen in time and being carried forward into their adulthood. So we started talking with that part, which is more emotional empowerment, allowing that part to have a voice. And as we started talking with that part, it was extremely angry because of how hurt it was. And it was clear that this was the source of the self-hate, because this part of them felt like if they had just done better, then none of this would have happened. And they felt like it was all their fault that all of this horrible stuff had happened to not only them, but loved ones. And so we validated those feelings. Now, really, really important, validation is not the same as agreement. Validation is just saying that something makes sense and showing understanding for something. It is not saying, yes, that's correct, it was your fault. So there's a big difference between saying that and saying, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you would feel like this was your fault and that you would feel really angry because you literally were not able to recognize that other people existed. And so the only possible conclusion was that it was your fault. And if you believed that it was your fault, makes a whole lot of sense that you would be really, really angry at yourself for not doing better, not working harder to protect your family. And the more we did this, the less angry they got and the more sad they got, because anger is a shielding emotion. It helps to protect other emotions that don't feel safe. And so as they started to feel more heard, understood, and safe, we were able to get under the anger and into the underlying emotion, which was sadness. And here's the really magical part. Once that part of them felt heard, understood, and safe and really started to open up, then there was room to rewrite the narrative. This is something that I see people run into all the time, where they try to brute force the change before they allow the part of themselves that is sort of blocking that to feel heard and understood and safe. And so what ends up happening is that part is fighting against them the whole time. So it feels like you're driving a car with the emergency brake on. And so this client was able to actually hear and, more importantly, integrate the idea that other people actually held responsibility in this situation. And once we got there, then things really started to blossom. Without all of that guilt and shame, the self-love started to naturally come back. And with this foundation of self-love, then we were able to start building on top of it. Now it was time for Dharma design, essentially intentionally crafting a life that was fulfilling for them. And so they became much more comfortable having hard conversations, like having a conversation with their parents about moving out. They also started to seek out relationships that made them feel connected and fulfilled rather than just being what other people needed them to be. Through this, they met their partner who they fell madly in love with. Now, don't get me wrong, my client and their partner still fought just like every couple does. But the difference is that now, because my client felt this self-love for themselves, they were able to actually remain true to who they were and stay connected in the conversations, the arguments. And because of that, every time they went through some sort of argument or hardship in their relationship, it came out stronger in the end, until eventually they decided to move in together. And as they started to find all this fulfillment, they started focusing on their ontology, the framework by which they live their life, or the way that they understand the world around them. And in doing so, they started experimenting with things like meditation and started to have experiences of their own spirituality. And in doing so, their fulfillment only deepened. And that brings us to present day. And here we are. It is truly an honor for me to be some small part of these people's journeys. If you resonated with any part of the journey that I described today, and you'd like help on your own, there's a free 2-minute quiz where you can just get some quick insights into areas that you might want to focus on. Just go to ostaracoaching.com and check it out. If you want to have a free, no pressure conversation with me where I offer any help that I can along this journey, just go to ostaracoaching.com. I'll leave a link down in the description. And finally, the last thing is that if you are trying to validate yourself and you're running into trouble, this video, it'll either pop up here or be down in the description, shows you a little trick on how to help with validating yourself. Hope it helps, and I'll see you later. Bye.